Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to part one of our conversation about what it's like to be a controller. For this episode, we decided to ask 3 controllers about their journey and what they've learned by moving up to the controller position. On this episode, we're joined by Angelina Hendraka, Chief Accounting Officer at PowerSchool, Amy Garefis, Chief Accounting Officer at ZipRecruiter, and Wendy Zheng, Corporate Controller at Okta. Today, we'll talk about the day-to-day operations of being a controller, why some people prefer to start this work in smaller companies, and the people and leadership skills required for this position. Now I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hi, everyone. It is so great to have this all-star cast of controllers here for our show. I would love to give the crew here a chance to introduce themselves. Angelina, since you were the first that I contacted, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Angelina Hendraka. I am the Chief Accounting Officer for PowerSchool. So we are a software solution for mainly K-12 institutions, and we have a small sliver of higher ed market that we serve as well. So I've been in this role for a year and 2 days, and I oversee several functions. So your regular accounting, financial reporting, as well as tax, treasury, procurement, financial operations. So these are the AP, AR, payroll function, and the last small bit that I also oversee is insurance. I came over from DocuSign, where I was the corporate controller over there. I was there for just a little bit under 2 years, and prior to that, I was in accounting function of an asset management firm.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Angelina. Amy, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name's Amy Garefis, and I'm the Chief Accounting Officer at ZipRecruiter. I've been at ZipRecruiter for almost 8.5 years now. Manage a lot of the same functions that Angelina touched on. I think we all kind of manage the financial operations and reporting, tax, internal audit, all that fun accounting stuff. Prior to joining ZipRecruiter, I was controller at a financial services company in downtown Los Angeles, and then had various accounting management roles in investment banking and Sony down in LA.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. And last but certainly not least, Wendy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me as well. I'm Wendy. I'm the corporate controller at Okta, which is a identity software. And I've been there for over 5.5 years and seen an immense transformation from private company to public company. Have sort of gone through the growing pains of SOX and getting, close rigor down, all that good stuff that is more operational. But on the other side, building the team at the same time, running fast on operations and building the team. And it's just been an immense ride.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're really lucky to have 3 amazing professionals at public companies. The 3 of you are working for public companies, which it has its own unique ways of keeping the job fun.
Yeah, no, I think all 3 of us have gone through that transition from a private company to a public company. Yes. So, I mean, it's a great experience. I'm not sure if that's an experience that I care to go through one more time. So,
well, I've been a sucker for it throughout my career, Angelina. I think I've done several first year post IPO. The first time SOX, and then having to use that capital to ramp up your operations and systems. Yeah, I see some head nodding. I think we've all been through those joys, I'll call them. But segueing into the topic for today's show, so we really want to dig into the controller's role. Obviously there are a lot of folks at Gapify who are senior accountants and accounting managers who manage the accruals process, and obviously a lot of them want to become controllers someday. So just to take it from the top, and Wendy, I can start with you for this first question. what's your day-to-day like as a controller, particularly at a public company?
Yes, I think, as a controller versus a senior manager or a manager, you have a switch in your identity and your role. You go from more of a tactical accountant and technical accountant to being almost a people manager. And that is the core of my role. 80-90% of my role is in some form or shape of people management, not so much from an oversight standpoint, but just collaboration, coordination, and helping the team think through problem solving. Very rarely do I get involved in like a true technical matter, but obviously overseeing audits and overseeing the day-to-day close, but the team does the heavy lifting for the most part there. So I would say 90% of the job is really in some shape or form people management.
So you're no longer reviewing journal entries or signing off on memos, right?
I've been locked out of NetSuite now for getting it wrong.
Sometimes you can't help ourselves, right? And we still want that access. But yes, please tell your IT teams, if you're a controller, to just keep you off. And I guess that's a good segue into, kind of piggybacking from Wendy's point there, Angelina. I think a lot of us in accounting in our earlier years, because we're so consumed with creating that really, really nice spreadsheet with the fancy formulas, I think it causes us to lose focus on like the next stages of a career, which to Wendy's point is more tactical and more collaboration. So we think the coolest spreadsheet, in other words, gets us to the controller level, but that's not the case, right, Angelina?
Yeah, no, that's great. So, I mean, I think the first thing that you need to do is you absolutely have to be good at your craft, right? You can't be a controller coming over from a completely different function. And ideally, to do a decent job as a controller, you do have to know how to do journal entries. Like you do have to have a great understanding of how systems work, how process flows work. But I guess, if you kind of want to make that jump from, being kind of like a single contributor, being really, really deep into the weeds, into being a controller, you kind of have to be the jack of all trades and master of none. So you have to always keep in mind that, okay, so I'm really good at the certain things that I'm doing right now. Are there any opportunities for me to move on and probably gain exposures in other areas? And because you kind of want to have to be well-rounded, and you have to have that good mix of technical, operational systems, people management. So it's kind of like all of the above, and they need to kind of balance each other out. So, I actually started in public accounting in external audit. And when I moved over to the industry, I was in a technical accounting / accounting policy person. And that's great because, it kind of gives me exposure to the company and the business while still being able to contribute from day one. And the thing is, if you look at a technical accounting policy person, no offense, they tend to be quite rigid and by the book. And that's what I was. But, I can't jump from being technical accounting directly to becoming a controller. So what I did is I actually requested for a lateral transfer to controllership. And, the biggest thing that I learned there is that it's not better to get things 100% correct technically and according to the literature if you have to sacrifice efficiency. So, practical expedience became my best friend. And, over time, I also learned that materiality is my best friend. So, just being able to kind of balance out between what's technically correct and what is what makes sense operationally is kind of one thing that I learned the most in my years in accounting operations.
Yeah, well, Angelina, it's tough to be well balanced if you're too rigid in very specific areas. So that's a really great point.
Yeah.
And I guess to segue from that topic to you, Amy. So, Angelina talked about just balance and learning how to pick up different skills that you need as a controller. I haven't found that it doesn't seem like there's like formal training programs that equip the next controllers and the current accounting managers to pick up the balance that Angelina is talking about. When you were going up the ranks, Amy, like how did you go about finding these different skill sets? I mean, did you just have to learn it on your own?
Yeah, a little bit. So one of the things I think that really will help, those that are trying to go the path to controller is just to learn as much as possible about all the functions that are under the controllership. So all the, different departments that Wendy, Angelina, and I listed, reporting, tax, internal audit, just talk to your colleagues, ask them what they do, get to know as much as possible about it, just so that even if you don't have that firsthand experience, you're at least aware of how things are working. I mean, naturally in smaller accounting departments, you kind of get that exposure anyways. So, for my experience in particular, prior to Zip, I kind of got the approach where I was just thrown in as controller to like a 20-person team and kind of had to learn everything all at once. But at Zip, when I came in as controller, I was actually the first accounting hire. So I literally had to do everything, which was really great hands-on experience. But what I saw as, the company kind of grew in scale is that the first few people that joined also got that super wide experience because, I was passing to them to do everything. And so they directly learned all parts of the business and kind of scaled up. But it was a little more challenging for people that came later because they had to work a little bit more to know what the person 2 desks down was doing. So, it would be great if there was a training program or a book, but honestly, even if there was, networking, talking to colleagues, getting to know the processes, asking questions and trying to understand the big picture is probably the best way to really scale up and get to that next level.
Well, Amy, I think you hit on a really great point there that I had never thought about, which is when you're a controller at a smaller shop, you have no choice but to be everything for everyone, right? So that was probably your quick training to equip yourself with these skills that you needed as a controller. So maybe that would you guys say that that's maybe a tip for up and coming controllers and maybe find a smaller organization where they can get their hands on everything? Or I guess there's different ways of looking at it, right? You also need public company experience, right? Because that's unique and that's what's revered in our industry. But I'd love to hear, I'll keep this open ended for the team here.
I think it is a good tip, but it's also really tricky because you can't do everything. And if you go into a small company that expects you to know every single aspect of every single part of accounting, you're going to fail because nobody does. So you got to make sure that you pick the right company that understands, maybe you're the only person on payroll that's doing accounting or you're of a very small team, but you're going to need resources too, right? So you got to pick a company that understands that you're going to be spending on outside consultants and you are not going to be able to know the answer to every single question they have. I don't know, but I'll get back to you is a common response that I had my first few years because I just didn't know. It was a new industry, new job. So I think it is a good, choice to pick a smaller company where you can see a lot of stuff, but just make sure you pick the right one that understands the breadth of what you're bringing to the team.
I agree with Amy, and similar to Angelina, coming from public accounting and going into industry, there's a big operational gap that we all have to make the jump and the leap. And having a smaller company with a balance of resources, allows you to learn at a rate that is acceptable to you as well. You go into a public company, there is no leniency on quarterly filings and whatever regulatory requirements that are framing your work, right, and the timing of your work. So to the extent that you find an environment that allows for that flexibility and resourcing, but also allows for the flexibility of time to learn, that's where I find a lot of benefit as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you need to be comfortable with the idea that you don't know everything, and you have to be okay to be proven wrong and be curious and willing to learn, right? So, I think switching from a public company public accounting, where there is a huge amount of resource, like a huge amount of technical resource, you can ask the question and then somebody's going to feed the answer to you. And, that's kind of the model that they want because you have to be right as a consultant, right? in a corporate environment, it is totally okay to not know the answer, to say I'll get back to you, to learn from external consultants, and to stumble along the way, as long as you learn from where you make mistakes, and make sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes going forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what you folks just described there is so underappreciated. I think a lot of times in accounting, our performance is measured by month-end closes and 10Qs and 10Ks, but you look underneath the hood, there's just a slew of different responsibilities that is challenging for the new up and coming controller. And along those lines too, I think about just managing teams in general, right? Like when I first started managing teams in industry and accounting, I had no idea how to run a one-on-one. I'll be very frank. I knew I had to have them, but as far as like the right format or the right strategy and approach, that's, I think, another item that's really underappreciated with the job that a controller has. And so, maybe Amy, I could start with you first on this. How do you go about developing your team, or what are some good practices or best practices that you'd like to share with the audience in terms of growing your team and having good relationships with them?
Yeah. So in terms of growing the team and having good relationships, my personal philosophy is building out my team is you've got to have the skills that I'm hiring you for, minimum, right? That's table stakes. If you're a GL accountant, you have to know what a GL is. If you're a tax accountant, you have to be able to do most of our taxes. So once you get through the resume process, you have a lot of people that have the minimum requirements and can probably technically do, the output of the job. So once you get past that, it really comes down to me making sure that I'm hiring people that I want to work with, that I'll enjoy spending time with, that are collaborative and free thinkers and diverse schools of thought. How are they going to be as, conduits from my department to different areas of the business? I'm sure we've all been in jobs where the accounting department is looked at as, an obstacle or something you want to get around. That's not what I want to run. I want to have a department where, we're a partner to the business. And so in terms of building my team, I really, really lean on personality and collaboration and how are they going to work with one another and myself. And then in terms of, you touched on one-on-ones, and my heart jumped a little bit when you said that, because I don't have a format for one-on-ones. I'm a person that I manage 4 people directly now, and that's kind of my max because I like to be able to spend enough time with each of them. And, they all have different styles. And so I think in an ideal world, I would have an agenda or a perfect format that worked. And I kind of went through each time. But the reality is that all 4 of them are very, very different. And so, we've just gotten those relationships with one another where we've kind of on our own, or the 2 of us, figured out what works best for us to like update one another on how the business is doing and what's important and stuff like that. And some of them I meet every single day or 2 times a day for 15 minutes. Some of them I meet 2 times a week. So it's just, it's important to get to know who they are as individuals, how you manage them, how they manage you. And that should kind of, in my mind, kind of drive how you handle your one-on-one and your, mentorship of your direct reports.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, just naturally as accountants too, we tend to think about, quantifying like performance in our team's performance. But, some of the points that you raised there, Amy, it's trust, it's a relationship. And that's, not something that is necessarily scientific. So you don't have to have a specific format for your one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Angelina, kind of extending on that. Do you work with your team, your direct reports on like career advancement and think about different pathways for different folks in your team to pursue? Is that part of the controller's job, or do you have a different approach there?
No, so I think one of my former bosses told me this approach, and to me it's brilliant, right? So what she said is, okay, so you have two things. You have what you currently have in your team, right? The people, their skill sets, the levels that they have, and where they are located and all that. And then the second part of the equation is you have to think about what your ideal team structure should look like. And then you try to kind of marry them up and you see where people fit. And you have to be patient about it because you're not going to get the right fit into your ideal structure. But what you need to do is you need to figure out a way to work toward the ideal structure that you have for your team. So I always keep that in mind when I'm thinking about my direct reports as well as the people that are reporting to my direct reports. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, to me, the biggest thing that I can do as a leader is to actually trust my team members to do the job that they are supposed to do. So I think it was really hard for me personally because I feel like if I do the job myself, it'll probably be quicker. And I know that I'll get the result that I want, but it's not scalable and it's not good for the team's development. So having to step back and really just come in when the team asked me to help maybe remove obstacle or tackle problems or talk to people that are not responsive. So being able to kind of step back is the one area that I have had to learn sometimes the hard way, and I continue to learn.
Yeah. And Wendy, turning over to you now. So a similar topic and similar theme here as far as managing teams. Any words of advice or words of wisdom for best practice on growing?
I second everything Amy and Angelina have said, right? Just the growth in ourselves of becoming that leader requires us to delegate, requires us to kind of get out of the doer mindset and become a leader. And that's a jump that I think everybody needs to make, to get into the controller role. And it's not an easy one. It's even harder than getting that broader experience and exposure and scope. So I definitely hear what Angelina is saying. The challenges that I've seen in growing teams in a very fast-paced environment like Okta's is that we can never hire fast enough, right? And we can never let people sit in their seat long enough before we need the next level. And so how do you plan ahead a year from now? What is that team structure you're looking for? How do you hire people and give them that time and seat to allow them to grow into it? There's two components I think of that really has driven the growth of individuals in my group. First one is, getting them to expand outside of the accounting role itself, being that business partnership that Amy talked about, partnering up with our workplace to negotiate leases, partnering up with commercial and our AEs to negotiate rev recs, around customer contracts, legal to, talk about every other comp structure there is to talk about. So, there's just a lot of partnership to be had, M&A, you name it. It all kind of funnels into the accounting org to account for it. So when you're training your team to be very upstream in that process, it just makes the process easier. And you're not holding the catcher's mitt at the end of it, trying to figure out what happened. And so I think that's a big, big learning and something I remind the team of all the time. The second piece is succession planning, because we're growing so fast. You have to have somebody to delegate to if you want to grow. So it's very hard to manage a static team in a growth environment, right? You hire someone to be a manager, you need them to be a senior manager the next year. How do you get there? It's by them hiring a successor to train them up to be a manager. And so those are the two areas where I think my directs, my skip levels are being actively managed to and actively reminded of, because otherwise the business outgrows us very quickly.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.